What would you do if the woman you whispered to every morning for 3 months suddenly opened her eyes and said your name? At exactly 6:43 a.m., the first sunlight of September slid through the tall windows of Hopewell Medical Center, casting warm, golden streaks across the sterile white floors. For Dr. Jack Callahan, it marked the beginning of another day in the neurological intensive care unit. He was 31, calm but deeply present, the kind of doctor whose presence brought comfort to the families waiting outside closed doors, their hearts full of questions and fear. Jack didn't walk with a rushed pace like some of his colleagues. Instead, he moved quietly, not sluggish, but gentle, as if even his footsteps had learned how to respect the silence of this floor. This was the ICU, after all, where machines hummed in rhythm with fragile lives. And Jack had long understood something many young doctors hadn't yet grasped, that in this wing, healing didn't always come from prescriptions or scans. Sometimes it came from being seen, from being spoken to, even if the patient couldn't respond. Especially then. He tugged lightly at the sleeves of his white coat, the fabric already wrinkled from the long night before. His hair, dark brown and always slightly unruly, no matter how carefully he combed it, caught a glint of the morning light. There was a kindness in his expression, not the polished kind for show, but the kind that lived in the quiet corners of who he was. He checked his patient list. Room 314. He didn't need to read the name. He knew it by heart. Ava Carter, 28 years old. In a coma for 92 days. One of the youngest female billionaires in the country, a fact that had little meaning now, as she lay unresponsive, her body quiet, her mind locked somewhere between the world of the living and something else. 3 months ago, her face had been splashed across every financial news outlet in America. A car crash. No drugs, no foul play, just a sharp curve and a late-night meeting that had pushed her schedule too far. Ava's name drew attention, not because of what happened to her, but because of who she was. The Carter family fortune had built empires, hotels, tech, green energy, political donors, legacy money. And yet, in room 314, none of that mattered. All the power in the world couldn't wake her. Jack paused outside her door. There was no family waiting today. Her father had flown back to New York for business. Her assistant hadn't come since the 2nd month. Sometimes her aunt visited, sometimes a driver dropped off flowers, but mostly it was just the staff, the nurses, and Jack. He pushed open the door softly. The room smelled of lavender and medical-grade sanitizer, a strange combination that Jack had come to associate with Ava. Her monitors blinked steadily. The IV pump made its faint click. She lay still beneath soft white blankets, her golden hair carefully braided to one side by one of the nurses who had taken a liking to her. But to most of the staff, Ava Carter had become a case file, a puzzle. A notable patient to bring up in lunchroom conversations. She's still stable. Her vitals are holding. No change today. To Jack, she was more than that. He didn't just review her chart. He talked to her, every single day. He stepped to her bedside, his voice quiet and low, the kind of voice you'd use with someone who mattered. "Good morning, Ava," he said gently, lifting her chart. "It's a beautiful day out, one of those soft September mornings where the leaves are just starting to turn. You can see them outside your window." He began checking her vitals, gently adjusting the cuff on her arm, looking for any tiny reaction, a twitch, a sigh, a movement of the eyes. There was none. There never was. But Jack spoke anyway. "I brought a new book today," he continued, unwrapping a fresh bandage. "It's about a violinist in Vienna during the war. She plays to survive, and her music helps others survive too. Thought you might like that." Nurse Clara stood at the doorway, watching silently. She and Danielle, the evening nurse, often exchanged glances when they saw Dr. Callahan in room 314. He always spent longer with Ava than with any other patient. He adjusted her pillow more often. He talked to her as though she might open her eyes any minute and respond with a smile. Some thought it was odd. Others thought it was sweet. Clara thought it was something else entirely. Honorable. Jack smoothed a corner of the gauze across Ava's arm, frowning slightly at a patch of skin irritated by the IV. "You know," he said, half smiling, "there's a study I read last night. Some coma patients can actually hear everything. They just can't respond. Crazy, right?" He glanced at her face. Still motionless, eyes closed, a doll-like stillness. But he kept talking. He always did. "Anyway, if you're hearing me, I just want you to know, you're not alone in here. You've got people who care, people rooting for you. I'm rooting for you." He paused. The words weren't scientific, they weren't measurable, but they were real. And if Ava Carter could hear anything from the deep silence of her mind, Jack Callahan wanted this to be what she heard. Ava Carter hadn't always been known for silence. Before the accident, her voice carried through boardrooms with conviction. She was the kind of woman who could look across a conference table filled with men twice her age and calmly explain why she was right without raising her voice, without blinking, without apology. At just 28 years old, Ava had already done what most people spent their lives dreaming of. She'd turned a modest family inheritance into a global real estate and tech venture. She'd been featured in Forbes, invited to closed-door summits, even dined with senators. And while many in her world whispered that she was too young or too bold, none could deny one truth: Ava Carter was a force. Until the crash. 3 months ago, a driverless SUV slammed into a concrete median at 2:14 a.m. on Interstate 84. No drugs, no alcohol, just a late-night route change and a software glitch. The media exploded, not because of the accident itself, but because the woman in the front seat was one of the youngest female billionaires in the country. News anchors used phrases like tragic twist, modern-day sleeping beauty, and the price of ambition. Paparazzi camped outside Hopewell Medical Center for weeks, hoping to snap a photo through the tinted glass. Columnists speculated about who would take over her empire. Social media wept, gossiped, and then moved on. But Ava didn't. She stayed behind, in room 314, silent. Still, suspended in time. To many on the medical staff, she became a curiosity. Not out of cruelty, just out of distance. That's what hospitals do sometimes. They create space. They file trauma under names and numbers, under status, stable, under no change. Her chart was thick with notes, but her room remained quiet. And yet, there was something deeply human beneath the machine readings, something that Jack Callahan never stopped seeing. He knew about her background, of course he did. Everyone at Hopewell did. But Jack had made a decision early on. He would not treat her based on who she had been in headlines. He would treat her based on who she was, now a patient, vulnerable, voiceless, and perhaps listening. He refused to see a billionaire lying in that bed. He saw a woman. "Most people think wealth protects you," Clara had once murmured, watching from the hallway as Jack adjusted Ava's blanket. "But it doesn't shield you from this." Jack had nodded. "Illness doesn't care who you are or how much money you have. It only matters how we care in return." Still, the name Carter carried weight. Hospital administrators checked in more often than usual. Legal teams whispered in conference rooms about liability. Hopewell's PR staff crafted statements they hoped would never be needed. But Jack wasn't interested in statements. He was interested in the small things, the slight twitch in her fingertips, the rhythm of her breathing, the warmth of her skin. He noticed how the light from the window traced the line of her jaw each morning, how her golden hair, braided by Nurse Clara, shimmered like the edge of a field at sunrise. He didn't know if Ava could hear him, but he acted as if she could. One morning, as he replaced her IV bandage, he spoke softly. "You know, I read somewhere that your company designed a clean water system for rural hospitals in Kenya." "That was smart, practical. You always think like that?" There was no reply, only the faint beep of monitors. But Jack smiled. "I figure you probably don't like people bringing it up. All the girl genius stuff must get exhausting." He paused. His fingers adjusted the tubing gently. "Well, I don't care about your net worth, Ava, or your magazine covers. I just want you to come back." What Jack didn't know was that somewhere inside, Ava Carter was fighting. She had heard him every morning. His voice had been the only consistent thing in a blurry, terrifying world where her body refused to respond. At first, it had been like hearing through glass, distant and distorted. But over time, his words became clearer, warmer, real. In a sea of clinical voices and cool latex gloves, his touch had been the kindest. She had begun to count the moments by his visits. The way he spoke of the seasons, the way he described his commute, the stories he told about a violinist in Vienna or a storm that knocked out the power on his street. Jack Callahan wasn't just treating her body, he was anchoring her soul. She wanted to respond. God, how she wanted to speak, to move, to blink, to reach for the man who refused to let her slip into nothingness, but nothing worked. Her will was strong, but her body refused, until something began to shift. It started with the dreams. Less fog, more clarity. She dreamed of his voice saying, "It's okay, Ava. You're not alone." She dreamed of leaves turning red outside her window, of violins, of sunlight on skin. And then she dreamed of opening her eyes, and soon she would. But not just yet. Because first, the world needed to remember that even billionaires can be forgotten, that even the strongest minds can fall silent, and that sometimes the only thing powerful enough to call them back is kindness. The kind of kindness that shows up every day, that whispers stories into the quiet, that holds a hand no one else sees, and believes in someone who can't say thank you yet. The hallways of Hopewell Medical Center stirred to life by 7 o'clock a.m. Coffee cups clinked at the nurses' station, wheelchairs creaked faintly down linoleum floors, and the first pages of the day buzzed quietly over the intercom. But in room 314, something different stirred, something quieter, something not found in any medical textbook. Dr. Jack Callahan stood beside the bed of Ava Carter, gently checking her IV line. His voice was soft, barely above a whisper. But it carried weight. "Morning again, Ava," he said, as if greeting an old friend. "Leaves are a little brighter today." Crimson, almost like fire. You'd love the way the light hits them around 7:15. There's this one maple just outside the cafeteria that's turned completely gold overnight. "I thought about taking a photo, but then I remembered you always strike me as someone who prefers real moments to digital ones." He smiled to himself. No response. Not from her, at least. The machines kept their rhythm, beep, pause, pulse, click. Jack adjusted her blanket and continued, unfazed. This was his ritual. Every day before rounds, before meetings, before the whirlwind of patient charts and lab reports, he came here. And he spoke to her. Not just the way doctors sometimes talk to unresponsive patients out of habit or protocol. He spoke to her like she was listening, like she was present, because in his heart, he believed she was. He told her about his commute, the jazz station that played Miles Davis too early, the bakery near 6th Street that had finally reopened, the stray dog that had started waiting for scraps outside the staff entrance. Sometimes he brought her quotes from books he was reading, poems he found tucked into the corners of old journals. Funny things the nurses said, sad things too. He shared them all, as if keeping her tethered to the world. One morning, he recited a line he'd underlined the night before. "The human soul doesn't vanish in silence. Sometimes it's waiting for the right voice to return." He didn't know why it made him think of her, but it did. Clara, the day nurse, often peeked in during these visits. She never interrupted. Just listened, leaning against the doorframe, arms folded, quiet awe in her eyes. She once said to Jack, "You talk to her like she's awake." Jack had replied, "Maybe she is." Clara didn't argue. She knew better. Because sometimes, when Jack spoke, Ava's breathing seemed just a little calmer. Her heart rate just a little steadier. Coincidence? Perhaps, but maybe not. Jack had once cared for a boy who came out of a coma after 52 days. The boy later said he remembered everything: the nurses who hummed show tunes, the dad who cried quietly each night, the doctor who read Harry Potter aloud. "You don't forget kindness," the boy had said, "even if you can't say thank you." Jack never forgot those words. That's why he kept speaking, even when others stopped believing, even when administrators stopped asking for updates. Even when Ava's father stopped calling twice a day, because Jack wasn't talking to a billionaire or a brand, he was talking to a woman, a soul, someone who still deserved to be spoken to, no matter how long the silence lasted. One morning, he brought her flowers. Not the kind from florists wrapped in plastic, real ones from a tree just outside the hospital. Bright red leaves, pressed gently in wax paper. "I thought these might feel familiar," he said, placing them by her bedside. "They remind me of those rooftop garden projects your company funded. I read about them last night. You really believed in making cities breathe again." He paused, eyes resting on her still face. Funny how someone who brought so much life to concrete jungles now sleeps in stillness. But maybe you're just resting, preparing for something more. He sat down beside her, elbows on his knees, voice low. "I don't know if this helps you, but I need you to know you're not forgotten. Not here, not by me." His throat tightened. He looked away. "I'm not here because of your last name, Ava. I'm here because I think there's still someone in there, fighting." What Jack didn't know, what no one knew, was that Ava was fighting. Inside the darkness, his voice had become her compass, a gentle thread pulling her back toward the world. She couldn't move, couldn't speak, but she could feel. She felt the difference in his hand show they didn't rush. She heard the warmth in his tone, how it never treated her like a diagnosis. She knew when he was near, and more than anything, she waited for his voice. Other voices came and went, clinical, mechanical, efficient, but Jack's voice was different. It lingered. It soothed. It called her name like it still meant something. She didn't know if she could ever wake, but she knew she wanted to, because of him. Back in the room, Jack stood to leave. "I'll see you tomorrow," he said, gathering his notes. He hesitated at the door, turned. "I think tomorrow I'll bring in some music, something quiet. I'll find a playlist." "Maybe Chopin?" He smiled. "I bet you're more of a jazz girl, though. Something with soul." And with that, he left. The room returned to its quiet hum, but something had shifted. Not in the charts, not on the monitors, but somewhere deeper, in a place no scan could measure. A place where a voice could become an anchor, and a whisper, the beginning of a miracle. At first, it was just a hum. Distant, faint, like the low vibration of music coming through the walls of another room. Ava Carter didn't know where she was. She didn't remember the crash, the spinning tires, the screech of metal against concrete. All she knew was that she was trapped in a place where her mind floated, but her body refused to follow. It was dark. Not the kind of darkness you experience at night. This was deeper, thicker. A silence so complete it nearly drowned her. She didn't know how much time had passed, a day, a week, a month. All she knew was that somewhere above the surface someone kept speaking. A man's voice, warm, steady. Unhurried, he didn't yell, didn't beg. He just showed up. At first, she thought she was imagining him. The voice talked about weather, books, coffee that was too strong, a dog by the back door of a hospital. It sounded like something from a dream. But then, one day, the voice said her name. "Good morning, Ava." Her name. Like a key turning in a lock, and suddenly she realized this was real. She couldn't speak. She couldn't move. But deep inside, Ava Carter was awake, conscious, present, terrified. She wanted to scream, to wave her arms, to blink furiously. But nothing worked. Her body felt like a frozen shell, and her willpower like a whisper against a hurricane. Still, every morning, he returned. She began to memorize the sound of his footsteps, the slight creak in his left shoe, the soft inhale before he spoke. "The leaves are turning." "I think fall might be your favorite. There's this bakery that just reopened. You'd love their cinnamon rolls. Dangerous stuff. I brought a new book today." Something quiet and sad. "I think you'd appreciate it." And with each sentence, something inside her began to rebuild. Tiny pieces of herself, fragments of memory, humor, emotion, came back to life. She remembered her apartment in Manhattan, her favorite candle, her mother's laugh, her own voice. But above all, she remembered this man, Jack. She heard the nurses say his name, Dr. Jack Callahan. She didn't know what he looked like, but she knew his voice like a lifeline. Other voices came and went. Some were clipped, some were kind but distracted. Some spoke about her as if she wasn't there. But Jack, he spoke to her, like she was still Ava. Still someone, not just a coma patient or a news story. It was a strange thing to fall for someone when you couldn't say a word. But day after day, she waited for him. She hung on every syllable, every quiet chuckle, every awkward pause when he wasn't sure what to say. He told her about a time he got soaked in the rain walking into work, about a little girl in room 309 who gave him a drawing of a dragon that looked more like a potato, about how he burned toast 3 mornings in a row. She smiled inside. She laughed, even if no one could see it. And sometimes she cried, because Jack saw her, even when no one else did. Even when she couldn't speak for herself. The worst moments were at night, when the room fell silent and the machines beeped in rhythm and the weight of stillness pressed against her chest. That's when the doubts crept in. What if I never wake up? What if this is forever? What if he stops coming? But morning always came, and with it Jack. There was one morning she remembered it clearly when his voice sounded tired, a little slower. He told her about a rough night in the ER, about a young patient they couldn't save. "I know I'm supposed to be used to this," he whispered, "but I never really am." She wanted so badly to hold his hand, to squeeze it, to let him know he wasn't alone either, but all she could do was listen. And wait, one morning, she felt something change. It wasn't big. Not a miracle, just a flicker. Her fingers almost moved. A flutter beneath her skin. It startled her. And when Jack came in that morning, she tried harder. Tried to blink, to twitch, to speak. But nothing. Still, his voice was there, like always. "You're still here, Ava." "I can feel it." She wanted to scream, "Yes, I am!" But her mouth didn't move, not yet. Still, Jack believed. She felt it in every word, every touch. Every pause filled with patience. He believed in her when she couldn't prove she was still there. He showed up anyway. And somewhere deep in the darkness, Ava Carter made a vow. "If I ever get out of this, I will find him. I will look him in the eyes and say thank you. For every morning. For every word. For seeing me when I was invisible." And little did she know, That moment was coming sooner than anyone expected. It was a Tuesday. A quiet, ordinary morning at Hopewell Medical Center, with no alarms blaring, no emergencies running through the halls, just the soft rhythm of footsteps, hushed conversations, and the low hum of machines that kept time with fragile lives. Dr. Jack Callahan entered room 314 like he always did, gently, with quiet purpose, as if stepping into sacred space. He carried a fresh bandage in one hand and a paperback novel in the other. He hadn't planned what he was going to say. He never did. With Ava, he spoke from instinct. "Morning, Ava," he said softly, placing the supplies on the counter. "The air's cooler today. You'd love it, just the right kind of crisp. Smells like cinnamon and pine outside. If I didn't have rounds in an hour, I'd sneak you out for apple cider." He chuckled lightly at his own thought, still no response. But he didn't expect one. For 93 days, Ava Carter had laid still, her body resting, her mind somewhere else. But Jack had shown up every single morning, spoken every single word, held on to hope when science gave him none. He approached her bedside now, eyes scanning the monitors, just habit at this point. Everything steady, nothing new. And yet, today felt different. He couldn't explain it, there was no logical reason. But as he adjusted her IV and unwrapped the old bandage from her arm, something shifted, a stillness in the air that wasn't heavy but charged somehow. He paused, fingers frozen mid-motion. Then, in that tiny sliver of silence between beeps, he heard it. A whisper. So faint, he almost missed it. "Jack!" His heart stopped, literally stopped. For a second, he thought he had imagined it. He looked down. Ava's lips had moved. Her eyes closed for 3 long months, blinked. Once, twice, then opened fully. Slow, blurry, but awake. "Jack!" she said again, hoarse and barely audible. Jack's breath caught in his throat. He stumbled backward half a step, hand gripping the side rail of the bed, eyes wide. "Oh my God," he whispered. She looked at him, blinking against the light, her pupils adjusting, her lips parting as if trying to speak again. I can hear you," she said, her voice rough but real. Tears sprang to Jack's eyes. He'd dreamed about this moment, hoped for it, but nothing could have prepared him for the weight of it. "You're awake," he choked out. "You're... Ava, you're back." She gave a slight nod, as much as her body would allow. It was barely a movement, but to Jack, it was a miracle. "I've been hearing you," she said slowly, wincing a little. She didn't know. "Every morning." Jack pressed the call button, his fingers trembling, but his gaze never left hers. "I'll get help," he said, "but I'm not leaving. I'm right here." The door burst open seconds later. Nurses Clara and Danielle rushed in first, followed by an on-call resident. The room became a blur of movement, blood pressure checks, pupil responses, reflex testing. Jack stood quietly to the side, watching, overwhelmed. But Ava's eyes never left him. Through the whirlwind of activity, she tracked his every step. When the resident asked if she remembered anything, she nodded. "Just him," she said, eyes locked on Jack. "Doctor." Grace Howard, head of neurology, arrived minutes later. She was calm, but visibly stunned. "I've seen a lot in my 25 years, she murmured to Jack. "But this is extraordinary." She ran through her exam with practiced precision. Eyes, limbs, language, cognition. Ava passed every test. "She shouldn't be this clear," Grace whispered. "After this long, and yet—" "She is," Jack replied, his voice soft. "She's more than we ever knew." Later that afternoon, the room was finally still, the machines quiet. The charts updated. Jack sat beside her bed, hands folded. Ava turned to him slowly. You talk to me, she said, her voice stronger now. Every day. He nodded. I wasn't sure if you could hear me. But I couldn't not talk. Ava blinked. You were the only voice I held on to. I was lost in the dark, but your voice, it brought me back. Jack swallowed hard. I'm glad you came back. I came back because you gave me something to come back to. She tried to lift her hand, and Jack instinctively reached out, guiding her fingers into his. I didn't know if I'd ever get to say this, she whispered. But thank you. For everything. He shook his head gently. You don't owe me anything. I do, she said. You treated me like a person. When everyone else treated me like a story. Outside, the sun was beginning to dip, casting golden light across the floor. The same soft glow Jack had noticed the first morning he met her, but now Ava could see it too. And everything was about to change. The first full day after Ava Carter awoke was unlike any other at Hopewell Medical Center. Doctors flooded in from other wings to confirm the impossible. Nurses whispered in the hallway with tears in their eyes. Administrators quietly updated press statements they thought would never be used. But inside room 314, amid the steady rhythm of recovery, there was no chaos. There was only one thing Ava cared about. Him. Jack Callahan hadn't left her side for more than a few hours since that morning. Now, in the soft hush of late afternoon, he sat beside her again, coffee in hand, eyes slightly red from too little sleep and too many emotions. Ava lay propped against a mound of pillows, hair slightly tousled, skin pale but glowing with something that felt like life. She turned her head slowly toward him. You look like you've seen a ghost, she said, voice still raspy. Jack chuckled. I've worked here 6 years, and I've never seen anything like you. You make it sound like I came back from the dead. He hesitated, then met her gaze. You kind of did. Silence stretched between them for a moment. Not awkward, just full of everything that had been unspoken for 93 days. I heard you, Ava said, more seriously now. Every word. Jack blinked. You remember? She nodded. Not all at once. It started like echoes, distant and blurry, but the more you spoke, the clearer you became. You were the only thing that felt real. He looked away, struggling to process it all. I didn't know if I was helping, he admitted. I just couldn't stop talking to you. It didn't feel right to leave you in silence. You didn't just help, Jack, Ava whispered. You saved me. Jack turned back toward her, eyes wide. I don't mean physically, she said. Machines kept me breathing. Medicine kept me alive. But you kept me human. Her words came slowly, but they cut deep. I could feel the difference in the way you touched my hand, adjusted my pillow, the way you told me about the leaves changing. The rain on your walk to work, the violinist in Vienna. She smiled faintly. I held on to those stories like they were rope. Jack's throat tightened. He'd imagined this moment so many times, what he'd say if she ever woke up, how he'd explain why he kept coming back, why he treated her like someone who could still hear. But now that she was awake speaking, breathing, remembering it was she who was giving him answers. I don't know why I did it, he said quietly. I just couldn't bear the thought that you might be in there, alone. You were the only one who didn't treat me like a machine. She paused, then added, and you didn't know me. You didn't owe me anything. You had no reason to care. But you did anyway? He met her eyes. That's just how I believe people should be treated. Ava smiled. That's what makes you rare. She looked down at her hands, still shaky, but moving more each hour. I've spent most of my adult life surrounded by people who saw me as useful, strategic, someone to invest in or marry, or attach their name to. Jack was quiet, letting her speak. But in here, for the first time in a long time, I felt like someone just saw me as a person. She turned her eyes back to him. And that was you. Jack couldn't speak for a long moment. He simply reached out, resting his hand gently over hers. There was no need for words right then, because Ava knew, and so did he. The door opened softly as Dr. Grace Howard stepped in, clipboard in hand, smile lighting her face. "You've got quite the fan club forming outside," she said to Ava. "Your company's PR team is already trying to schedule a statement." Ava groaned. "Already?" "Already," Grace confirmed. Then turned to Jack. "By the way, the staff is unofficially referring to you as the man who woke the heiress. Thought you'd enjoy that." Jack laughed. "Oh, great. That won't follow me around at all." Grace winked, then excused herself to give them privacy again. When the room quieted, Ava sighed. "I don't want to go back to that world," she murmured. Jack tilted his head. "What do you mean?" "The press. The pressure. The polished meetings and fake smiles. The people who'll pretend to care now because I'm back." She looked at him with vulnerability raw in her voice. "I want something real." Jack didn't hesitate. "I think you've already started finding it." They sat in stillness again, but this time it was warm, comfortable, shared. Jack leaned back in the chair, letting his shoulders drop, the weight of months of uncertainty finally beginning to lift. Ava closed her eyes, not in sleep, but in peace. And for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel alone. Because Jack hadn't just saved her when she opened her eyes. He had saved her in the dark. When no one else believed. When her body was still. When her voice was gone. He had spoken. And because he believed in her before she could believe in herself, she came back. Recovery wasn't linear. There were days when Ava Carter felt strong, when her voice steadied and her hands stopped trembling. And then there were days when the simplest things, like standing up or brushing her hair, reminded her just how much had been lost. But through it all, Jack Callahan remained. Not as her doctor now. Not really. Her case had been transferred to another attending, per protocol. He was no longer in charge of her file. But he was still there, as something else, something neither of them had fully defined. They started talking more, really talking. It began with short visits, 10 minutes, then 20, then full afternoons. One day, Jack brought 2 coffees into room 344, one black, one with oat milk and cinnamon. "How did you know?" Ava asked, surprised by her usual order. "I didn't," he said. "But you seem like someone who enjoys complexity, with a little comfort on top." She grinned. "You're not wrong." It was during one of those quiet afternoons, with sunlight spilling onto the floor and monitors finally silent, that Ava asked the question she'd been holding back. "Why did you become a doctor?" Jack didn't answer right away. He looked down at the coffee cup in his hands, thumb tracing the edge of the lid. "My brother," he said finally. Ava waited. "He died when we were kids." "Car accident. He was 11, I was 13. A breath." A pause. The kind that carries years of unspoken weight. The hospital staff. They were kind. But no one explained anything. Not really. My parents were lost. I remember just sitting in the hallway watching this machine next to him beep slower and slower. His voice cracked slightly. I promised myself that if I could ever keep someone else's family from feeling that helpless, I would. Ava reached out, her hand brushing his. "Jack." He shook his head gently, smiling through the sadness. "It's okay. It's part of who I am now. I guess that's why I talk to coma patients." Even when it seems pointless, her voice was soft. It's never pointless. They shared stories after that. Ava spoke of the first time she realized people looked at her bank account before her face. Of boardrooms where she had to lower her voice just to be heard. Of friendships that dissolved the moment she stopped funding a venture. "Sometimes I wonder if anyone's ever liked me for me," she said quietly. "I do," Jack said, without hesitation. She looked at him, eyes full of something she hadn't felt in years. trust. Their conversations grew longer, deeper. They talked about favorite childhood books, about whether happiness was something you built or something you chose, about the best places to get late-night pancakes in New York City. One afternoon, Ava said, "It's strange, isn't it, how we got here?" Jack smiled. "I've seen a lot of patient recoveries, but never a friendship that started before the other person could respond." She laughed. "That sounds like something out of a novel." "Maybe it is," he said. "But I'm not complaining." A few days later, she was strong enough to leave her bed and sit by the window. Jack wheeled the chair closer, and they watched the trees outside, leaves fluttering gold and amber in the wind. Ava spoke first. "When I was trapped inside myself, I used to imagine this exact moment." Jack looked at her. "Sitting here, with someone who didn't want anything from me, who just stayed." He didn't speak, but she didn't need him to. There were moments of silence between them, but not the painful kind, the kind that says, "I'm here. You're safe. You don't have to fill the space." Jack had never known someone like Ava. She was sharp but gentle. Wounded but strong. Her strength wasn't in how she rebuilt businesses, but in how she let herself feel. Even now. Especially now. And Ava had never known someone like Jack. He wasn't dazzled by her wealth. He didn't flinch when she was quiet or weak. He didn't try to fix her, just stood beside her as she fixed herself. One evening, as visiting hours ended, Ava turned to him and said, "You know, most people meet after they're already put together. They see the polished version, the filtered story." Jack raised an eyebrow. "And us? You met me when I was at my worst. I couldn't speak, couldn't move, and you still saw value in me." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "I didn't need you to prove anything. I just needed you to be." That night, after he left, Ava sat by herself for a long time. No monitors, no alarms, no machines, just her, breathing steadily. Awake. Alive. And for the first time since the accident, she didn't feel like a patient. She felt like a person. A friend. And maybe, just maybe, something more. It was a Thursday evening, quiet, crisp, and bathed in soft golden light. Ava Carter had just returned from her first walk outside since the accident. With help from a physical therapist and the slow but steady strength rebuilding in her legs, she'd made it to the garden behind Hopewell Medical Center, a simple patch of green lined with benches, hydrangeas, and a fountain that bubbled like a calm breath. She returned to her room glowing. Not because of sunlight, but because she felt like herself again, and yet, someone new at the same time. Jack Callahan knocked gently before entering room 314, even though he never needed to anymore. She looked up and smiled. "You missed the garden walk," she teased. "I figured you deserved to take that first step on your own," he said. "I didn't want to steal the moment." Ava tilted her head. "You've never once tried to steal anything from me. That's rare." Jack pulled a chair beside her. "Most people just want to help." "No," she said gently. "Most people want to be seen helping. You just are." They sat for a while, talking about nothing and everything. About fall arriving early, about the hospital cat that had been adopted by the night shift, about how strange it was to feel your muscles tremble after months of stillness. And then, as the room settled into quiet once more, Ava looked at him with a steady gaze. "I want to ask you something," she said, "and I want you to feel free to say no." Jack blinked, caught off guard. "Okay." She took a breath. "When I'm discharged next week, I'd like to have dinner with you." Jack froze. Not out of discomfort, but because his heart had just forgotten how to beat for a second. "You mean, like, as friends?" Ava smiled faintly. "I mean, not as your patient." Not in this hospital, not surrounded by machines, just you and me. Somewhere quiet, where I can say thank you properly, and maybe start something new. Jack was quiet for a moment, processing her words. But before he could respond, Ava raised a hand. Before you say anything, there's something I need to tell you. Her tone shifted slightly heavier, not fearful, but earnest. If you say yes, you won't just be going out with me, she said. You'll be stepping into a world that comes with attention, scrutiny, headlines. Questions. Jack nodded slowly. I've imagined that. You'll have people Googling your name, wondering what your motives are. Some might say you're after money. Some will question why I'm with a man who drives a 10-year-old Honda and eats instant ramen. Jack laughed. That's oddly specific. Ava didn't laugh back. I'm serious. She looked him straight in the eyes. There will be whispers, cameras. My past relationships have made front pages. My philanthropy gets dissected like it's strategy, not heart. And no one, and I mean no one, will believe that I could fall for a man who once quoted Chopin and cinnamon rolls to me while changing my bandages. Jack let out a breath, but he didn't look away. Instead, he leaned in. I don't need the world to believe it, Ava. I just need to know you believe it. I do, she said, voice barely above a whisper. Then that's all I need. A long silence followed, but it wasn't tense. It was sacred. Two people sitting with truth. With history. With the undeniable pull that had been growing between them since the moment she first whispered his name. Jack finally reached for her hand. Not like a doctor steadying a patient, not like a friend offering comfort. Like a man choosing to stay fully, knowingly. If you're willing to take a chance on someone who spends his evenings reading medical journals and roasting vegetables in a tiny apartment, he said, then I'm willing to face whatever storm comes with loving you. Ava blinked back tears. Don't say that unless you mean it. I've meant every word I've ever spoken to you, even when I thought you'd never hear them. The moment hung between them like a string of light. No declarations, no dramatic music. Just two people, real, bruised, and honest, choosing each other. Outside, the sun dipped lower. Inside, something new rose. Hope. Intimacy. A spark not born of lust, or wealth, or perfect timing, but of long, quiet faith. Later that night, Ava looked out her window and whispered to herself, he loved me when I was silent. Let's see what we become, now that I can speak. It wasn't fireworks. It wasn't candle-lit rooftops or whirlwind trips to Paris. What Jack Callahan and Ava Carter built after she left the hospital was something quieter, a love made of everyday things. It was coffee cups and bookstore walks, handwritten notes tucked into take-out bags, arguing over which grocery store had the best peaches, laughing when Ava burned dinner, trying to follow Jack's perfect roasted chicken recipe. They didn't rush. After all, their beginning had taken time. 93 days of silence, then weeks of slow healing. Now months of simply being together. Jack would come over after late shifts, still in his scrubs, smelling faintly of soap and exhaustion. Ava would curl beside him on the couch, her head on his shoulder, listening as he talked about the lives he tried to save, the ones he couldn't, and the quiet victories no one saw. In return, Ava shared parts of herself. Few people ever reached. The grief of losing her mother at 15. The loneliness of boardrooms full of polished smiles. The pressure of never being allowed to fall apart. And through it all, they kept choosing each other. Not because it was easy, but because it felt real. One evening, they wandered through a small art museum in Brooklyn. No cameras, no interviews, no designer gowns. Just Jack, squinting at an abstract painting, and Ava trying not to laugh. I think it's a horse, Jack said. It's literally titled Woman in the Wind. Okay, but maybe the wind... Is the horse. She laughed so hard she had to sit down. That was them. Sincere, silly, safe. A love not defined by headlines or expectations, but by the way he always looked at her like she was whole, even when she didn't feel it. And the way she always made him believe his quiet life was enough. Because when your story starts with a whisper in a hospital room, the loudest kind of love often comes in silence, in showing up, in listening, in choosing each other again and again, especially when no one's watching. 1 year later, Jack Callahan stood outside room 314. It had been renovated since then. New paint, new flooring, a different bed. But the memory of that room, the moment she opened her eyes and whispered his name, would never leave him. That was the room where everything changed. And now, it was where he'd ask her the most important question of his life. Inside, Ava Carter was waiting. She turned as he entered, her heart already racing, though she didn't know why. Jack smiled, nervous but certain. "I thought this was the right place," he said softly. Ava looked around. "Back where it all started." Jack nodded. "Back where I fell in love with you. Even before you could say a single word." She didn't interrupt. He stepped closer, took a breath, then dropped to one knee. "I loved the version of you I spoke to in silence, the one who listened without ever answering, but somehow made me feel heard." He pulled out a small velvet box. "But the real you who laughs too loud at my jokes, who burns toast on purpose just to prove she can cook something better after that's even better than I imagined." Ava's hand flew to her mouth. Jack opened the box. "I'm not rich. I'm not famous, but I will show up every day. I will speak to you with kindness, even in silence. And I will love you exactly the way you deserve, for the rest of my life." Tears slipped down her cheeks. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Jack." 1,000 times, yes. They married in the hospital chapel. It wasn't grand, but it was real. Nurses, doctors, therapists, all the people who had once watched over Avano stood to witness something more powerful than medicine, a love that had begun in darkness and healed in the light. Today, when people ask Ava how Jack saved her life, she smiles and says, "He didn't save me when I woke up. He saved me when I was invisible. When I couldn't speak and he still saw me. That's what love really is, choosing someone, even when they can't choose you back." And Jack? He still talks to her every morning. Only now, she talks back. Life lesson, the quiet power of showing up. In a world that often celebrates grand gestures and loud declarations, this story reminds us of something quieter and far more enduring, the power of simply showing up. Doctor Jack Callahan didn't heal Ava Carter with miracles or medicine alone. He healed her with presence, with kindness, with the daily act of speaking to someone who couldn't speak back. For older generations who've seen life's highs and lows, this truth resonates deeply. Real love is built not on what we say, but on how we stay. Whether caring for a spouse through illness, comforting a friend in silence, or just being a steady voice in someone's darkness, our consistent compassion can become someone's lifeline. We may never fully know the impact of our quiet care, but as this story shows, it might just be the very thing that brings another soul back to life. So today, be gentle, be present, and never underestimate the healing power of kindness, even when no one seems to notice, especially then. Hoi, Chat GPT.